Hello. Good morning. My name is Nate. So good to be with you all again. As of Thursday, by the way, this is just kind of a fun thing for me. As of Thursday, I've been here at Grace for 3 years. So, yeah, it's been fun. I should applaud you. I'm so thankful for all you guys. It's been a great experience for us. Before this is not my first youth pastor job. Before this, I was at an EFCA church in Ames, Iowa. And my very first summer trip, I remember we went to Ensenada, Mexico. It was a missions trip. And after the missions trip, the church had traditionally done this extended trip for upperclassmen. And so after the trip, everyone leaves except these upperclassmen. So we stayed in San Diego, and we decided to do like some leadership training things. We did beach evangelism one day because, telling people about Jesus, and if you totally fail and you sound like a total doof, you're never going to see them again because you don't live in San Diego. They were in Iowa. So best way to train. And then we thought, well, let's do some comparative religion kind of stuff. And, there's like the classics. You could do like Mormonism or Islam. But we thought, from Iowa, we're in Southern California. Let's do something that is unique to Southern California. And so we decided to learn about and go to the Church of Scientology, all right, which was really fascinating. All right, so this is kind of like, this is not the building we were in, but this is a general idea, right? It was very fancy. The building was huge. We called them beforehand, and we were like, hey, can we come and take a tour? And they were very excited for us to come in. So we went in there, and we took this like 3-hour tour. And it was just so unique and so fun for these students to kind of experience this. But all in all, like basically we finished this whole thing, and what we realized was, this sounds pretty similar to a lot of other religions and kind of very similar to atheism in some ways, because essentially what they were teaching was, if you just kind of do some good things and, of course, pay them a lot of money, then you can become enlightened is kind of how they do. And if you pay them enough money, up to like $1 million, then you could become fully enlightened, basically, which would be a thetan. Which, of course, we thought sounded a whole lot like Satan, all right? So we made stickers that said, "Not today, Satan," and we thought that was so funny. Anyways, ultimately, Scientology at its core was very similar to kind of what we experience in our everyday life. And they taught that, if you just do good things, then good things will essentially happen to you, right? The most important thing that you can do, culturally speaking, is be a good person. And so we got to go back after this and have this great conversation with all of our students and kind of like, well, what does this really mean? Like, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to do good things? And it just kind of was this really helpful conversation. And it all came down to this question that we're going to talk about today. Can we just be good without God? Now, before I get into this, I do think it's important to give credit where credit's due. And so we have been doing this series, and we've done it before, and we're getting a lot of our kind of content from these two books here. There they are, both by Rebecca McLaughlin, and they are really great resources. So today, I only have so much time to talk about this. If you want to learn more, whatever, this would be a great resource. In fact, this white one of our high school small groups is doing, and it's just a really helpful resource. And no, I did not get paid to say that. It's just, I really genuinely think it is good, all right? So that's been kind of that series we're drawing on. So today, we're going to talk about that question, can we be good without God? And when I was preparing, 3 questions came to mind that I think are worth talking about today. So first off, can we just be good without a God? The second one is, can we just be good without belief in God? And then, can we just be good enough without God? And I'll explain these as we go. First one here, can we just be good without a God? Really, the question here is, can goodness exist without a creator? Or can goodness itself exist without some sort of God to create some sort of morality? And there's a large subsect of our culture that would say, well, of course, right? And they would point to things like murder or bullying or racism, and they would say, well, see, everybody can mostly agree that these things are wrong. So we don't need a God to tell us that these things are evil. These things are obviously evil. We don't need a God to tell us about that. However, I think to ask this question to especially somebody who does not believe in a creator, who does not believe in God, is kind of an impossible question to answer. Because ultimately, if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, then this idea that you can be even good is not really even a fair question because goodness doesn't even exist. So, and this is something that is very important, I should say, when it comes to like morality and talking about what it means to be good without a God. In fact, in 2014, an atheist named Yuval Noah Harari wrote what would then become a best-selling book titled *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, and he wrote this in that book: any large-scale human cooperation, whether a modern state, a medieval church, an ancient city, or an archaic tribe, is rooted in common myths that exist only in people's collective imagination. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. So what he would understand as an atheist is that if God did not create something, if there's no God to create anything, which he obviously does not believe, then therefore all of our morality, good, evil, are essentially just made up. Like it's kind of just dependent on the person, and person by person is deciding what is right and wrong. Therefore, there is no human rights. There is no laws. There's no justice. And he would even go on to say in his book that even something like equality, that doesn't exist. That was just created by a certain group of people. If you want to guess who that certain group of people is, it's Christians. So he would go on to say like things like equality, things like even human rights, they were just invented by Christians. That's kind of his general stance. And now you might say, well, this must just be an extreme opinion. Of course, like this can't be the normal opinion. Well, Richard Dawkins, another renowned atheist, says something very similar. If there is at bottom no design, then there is no purpose, no evil and no good, and nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. So these are not like extreme opinions, by the way. This is a very consistent belief among atheists that if there is no God, then morality, good and evil, it really doesn't even exist. Like there is no objectively good or objectively bad thing. We just kind of are making it up. And as like time has continued on, or you end up in different cultures and you look around, there's really no consistency because, well, we just kind of pick and choose what we want it to be, which means nothing is really evil, nothing is really wrong. And if God does not exist, then Dawkins and Harari are right. Good and evil do not exist. If there's no creator and we just kind of are this like random chance, this ball of atoms, then there is no reason why anything is right or wrong because we can just kind of do whatever we want because at the end of the day, we're just going to die and we're just going to become whatever the ground needs, the nutrients. Like, we're just nutrients, basically, maybe. That's it. And so whatever you're on this earth, you just do whatever kind of makes you happy. It's just one group's opinion against another. And the question that comes out of this is this a big deal? Because culturally, what we would say is, I don't know if it is a big deal, culturally speaking. They would say, like, as long as something's right for you, that's right for you. As long as it's right for me, it's right for me. Just don't tell me what I should do. Just let me do what I want to do, and you do what you want to do. And they just, as long as they don't interfere with each other, we're all good. You know, like, there's really nothing that's truly right or truly wrong. It's kind of just whatever you want to do. That's totally fine. That's kind of the general standard for morality across, especially the U.S., and is that a big deal? Well, of course it is. Like, absolutely it's a big deal, because if there is no standard for right and wrong, then, like, it's just anarchy. You could treat people however you want to treat them, and you are not doing anything wrong. In fact, according to this standard, we really couldn't even say that Hitler was a bad person. Not to get all cliche on you, right? But like, we couldn't go and say, well, Hitler did something inherently wrong, because all Hitler was doing what he thought was right. He had his own sets of standards of morality, and he thought he was helping people out. And you might argue, right, well, it's different because he hurt other people. That's usually kind of the counter, right? As long as you don't hurt other people, then you can do whatever you want. That's like, we'll draw the line right there. You know, just don't hurt other people. And I would say that we in America don't actually even believe that statement. Let me explain. So Hitler, in his 12-year reign, killed something around 6 million Jews, is the estimate, which is insane. Just horrifying. 6 million people. But according to the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-choice institute here in the U.S., there has been, on a low estimate, about 6 million abortions in the last 6 years. They can't count the ones that were just done kind of in their homes because we don't know that number. So it's probably higher, which means that in the U.S. that we have killed in 6 years as many human beings as Hitler killed in 12. And one set of ethics makes Hitler one of the worst human beings of all time, and the other set celebrates the right to choose. Now, here's the thing, right? I'm probably going to hear something afterward because somebody's going to be upset because I talked about something that is touchy and sensitive. The reason why this matters is because this is acceptable culturally speaking. But that's because we don't have any sort of set standards for what is right and wrong. And when nothing is really right and wrong, then that standard for the line that we draw, it moves. And there is no scientific debate, you can't make a debate at all scientifically that in the womb they are human beings. These babies are human beings. You can't debate it scientifically, it is proven. So all we're looking at is we're just saying, just like Hitler, this human life is less valuable than this human life, so it's okay for us to get rid of it. It's the same exact standard. It's the same thing. But one is okay and one is not. I'm not making a political statement here. I'm telling you who to vote for. I'm just telling you that human life matters. And when we leave the confines of a moral code, then we decide whatever we want to do, and nothing is right and nothing is wrong. And we think we found a line now, but if we wait 10 years, that line's going to move. And this is what happens when there is no objective morality. We end up just like Harari says, that there is no human rights, there's no laws, and there's no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. Instead, as Christians, we believe there is a right and a wrong, that there is morality, that God, when he created the earth, he created things that were right, things that were wrong. He designed us to know those things. In fact, Paul writes in Romans 2:14 through 15, for when Gentiles who do not have the law instinctively, or this word is by nature, naturally perform the requirements of the law, these, though not having the law, are a law to themselves, in that they show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience testifying and their thoughts alternately accusing or else defending them. The idea here is that even though the Gentiles do not have the written law, like the Jewish people did, they are still instinctively following parts of the law because the law was written on their hearts. They were designed and created with a sense of what is right and what is wrong. That is the reason why we can mostly all agree that murder, racism, and bullying is wrong, because we were created with that innate understanding. So when we ask, can we just be good without a God? The answer is no, because without God, good and therefore evil doesn't exist. Without some sort of God to create it, good and evil don't exist. It's just kind of dependent on whatever you want it to be, which leads to question 2. I'm assuming most of you have been to some sort of funeral or like memorial service. I've been to quite a few in my life. And they're all very different, right? Some people do like a celebration of life. Some people do kind of more of like a remembrance and more of like kind of a slower service. Some provide food. Some provide hors d'oeuvres. Some provide no food at all. Some do like open mic. Some choose a few people to speak. They're all very different, right? And so if like I'm going to a memorial or funeral, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But I do know one thing, guaranteed, no matter what funeral memorial I go to, and that is that the person who passed away was a really good person. No matter what. Like, never have I been to a funeral where they're like, he was okay. Like, it's always like, oh, they were a really good person, you know. They tried their best. And everybody's a good person, which, like, I'm not trying to necessarily be insensitive, because there are people that many of us have known, friends, family, coworkers, who are genuinely kind, thoughtful people who took care of people who deserve kind of this remembrance of being these kind and thoughtful people. But also at the same time, like, if that many people are good people, what does that even mean? Like, how can this person be good who does all these things and this person be good who did like all these things? But like, they weren't like the same, and yet they're both really good people. And this kind of leaves us with this question of like, what does it actually mean to be a good person? Like, what does it mean to be good? Which takes us to our second question. Can we just be good without belief in God? So the question is, can like a non-Christian, so if God created right and wrong, can a non-Christian still go out and be a good person? Is that possible? Now, you may not be able to tell because I'm standing on this platform, but I am not considered a tall person, all right? I think God knew if I was tall, it would be unfair genetically to the other men. So he made me short. And it was devastating, by the way, to learn recently that as like society in the U.S. has kind of like gotten bigger, or maybe it's just genetics, I don't know, the height for the average male has risen, and it is now 5'9", which makes me at 5'8" short. I am not average anymore, and that was really sad. However, I did some research, and I found that if I moved to Papua New Guinea, I would be considered tall, because the average height in Papua New Guinea is 5'4". So this is great news. Now, for those of you men, these are men, by the way, men's heights. For those of you men in here who say you're 6 foot but are actually 5'10" or 5'11", there is a shocking amount, by the way, of laps of like, there's a ton of men who are 6 foot and lots who are 5'9", and there's a big gap between 5'10" and 5'11" guys. It's very bizarre. So you men in here who say you're 6 foot but are actually 5'10", 5'11", you know who you are. If you were to go to the Netherlands, you would be short. Okay? Because their average height is 6 foot. They're apparently a tall culture. Now, if you're above 6 feet, it still kind of depends on who you're around, right? If you're around somebody much taller than you, then you look shorter. You don't look tall. In fact, one of my favorite pictures of maybe all time is this picture of Shaquille O'Neal and Yao Ming. So Shaq is 7'1", by the way, which is a giant. Okay, let's not like minimize how tall that is. But Yao Ming is 7'6". And so they took this picture together, and Shaq looks like what I look like every time I take a picture with a normal-heighted man. He just looks tiny, right? And it's crazy, and ultimately all this to say, it's because height, like what makes somebody tall or short, is kind of just dependent on who you're around at the time. Like, and really what we've kind of done is like, who decides what really is tall, right? Like we might be like, well, in the U.S., the average is 5'9", therefore, Nate, you are short. But why is the U.S. the right height standard? I personally like the Papua New Guinea one. So, like, there's just no standard as far as what height is, and this is kind of the conundrum we get into when we talk about who is good and who is not, is it seems to be an always moving bar depending on who you're around or who you want to compare yourself to. So, like, for example, if a lot of us, to go back to him, if a lot of us were comparing ourselves, like, if Hitler was a bad guy and that was the low bar, well, then there's a lot of really good people out there. Like, that's not a very high bar. But if the standard is like Irina Sendler, who saved 2,500 Jewish children from concentration camps during World War II, we're all pretty cruddy human beings. Like, I don't think most of us are achieving that level of, like, quote-unquote goodness. But usually what happens is we're like, well, as long as I'm better than that guy right there, or that lady right there, she is doing these things, I don't do those things, so I'm better than her, which means I must be a good person. Or like, well, this person did these good things. Like, if you hold the door open 5 times in your life and you weed somebody's yard who really needs help weeding it, and you do all these good things, and like, that's the standard. But if you only hold it open 4 times and you sometimes yell at your kids, then maybe you're not as good of a person. Like, we just don't really know. And the problem is when humans set the standard for goodness, the standard isn't consistent. When we set the standard for what makes somebody a good person or not, there is no standard at which we can actually hold somebody, which is why in everybody's funeral we can say that they were a good person. Because for the most part, nobody can really come and say like, well, they actually didn't reach this bar because the bar doesn't even exist. It just fluctuates wherever you want it to be. So if we're the ones determining, but that's not consistent, then the question is, who sets the standard for goodness? Okay, if humans can't set the standard because the bar moves way too much and we're just really inconsistent with what's good and what's not, who does set the standard? Well, as we've already determined, God determines what is right and what is wrong. He created us with this innate sense of morality, which means to state the obvious, that God is the one who sets the standard for what makes somebody good and what makes somebody not good. The standard that God sets, if you were here for our sin series that we just did last series, you would have heard a little bit about this, but that the standard for what is good would actually be then, if it's God himself, moral perfection. How many of you are morally perfect? All right, good. We can move on then. So we're all on the same page. Okay, so if that is the standard, if God is the standard, and it's moral perfection, then here's the ultimate reality. None of us are actually good. See, Paul writes this in Romans 3:12. He's quoting a psalm of David. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good. There is not even one. Jesus makes a similar statement in Luke 18:19. He's talking to the rich young ruler, and he says, "Why do you call me good?" Now, this word good is morally inherently good. No one is good except God alone. Now, to be clear, the rich young ruler is looking for, hey, am I a good person? Jesus is fully God, so Jesus is included in the statement that it is only God who is good, right? Because Jesus was morally perfect. But the idea here is no one is good except God alone. That's the standard. The standard for moral perfection is the standard that God sets. We don't achieve that standard, therefore we are not actually good. Which kind of leaves us with this okay, but is it possible for someone to not be a Christian and still do good things? You may not say well, okay, but sure. I wouldn't say somebody is inherently good, but can they still do good things? And every time I preach, I find it this great joy, and I feel this great weight and this great responsibility, and I get really nervous. I'll tell you, back there sometimes waiting, got to walk around, because I get nervous. And then the week preparing, I'm nervous, because what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm faithful to the text, and I'm preaching what God wants me to preach, that I'm honest and real with you guys, but I also don't want to be harsh, and so many things are running through my mind. And I prepare it, and I do the best I can, and then I come, and I preach. And afterwards, there are so many people who are so generous and so encouraging, and they'll come up, and they'll shake my hand, or they'll say something nice. And don't get me wrong, right? Encouragement is really good. It's one of the beautiful parts about Christian community is that we can encourage each other and build each other up, and it's this wonderful aspect to Christian community. But at the same time, it's I really didn't do it for myself. The reason I'm nervous is not because, I just want people to think I did a good job. It's because what I'm saying matters, and God needs to be glorified in what I say. But if I just came up on stage and I said some things that, and they encouraged you, and I gave you a really good TED Talk that just helped you go out and be a better person, that would be wrong. And what we're talking here is the difference between something that is moral and something that is good. And I think that in many ways that there are non-Christians who can do things that are moral, but they cannot do things that are good. Just like I could come up here and I could give you this talk and you could go out and feel encouraged, but if I don't talk about Jesus at all I've done is a moral thing. I have done nothing good. It is only good if at the end of this thing you think to yourself, how can I get closer to the creator of the universe? What can I do to obey him? What can I do for God? If you're pushed closer to God, then it can be a good thing. If all it is just this helpful TED Talk, it is not a good thing. So your non-believing neighbor, they might go and feed the homeless. And we would say that's a moral thing. But the difference would be if somebody went out and they fed the homeless in hopes that it might draw those people to a relationship with God. That's a good thing. And by the way, everything a Christian does not make that thing a good thing. Okay? The difference between a good thing and a moral thing is not whether or not you are by identity a Christian or not. Christians can do things that have that God is not a part in because we are not interested in it and we are just doing a moral thing. Christians can do moral things without them being good. And if our attempt to do a good thing is an attempt to do something without God, then it is not a good thing. In fact, Isaiah says in Isaiah 64:6, "For all of us have become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a filthy garment." Which, by the way, is like the G version of this verse. It's not just like, oh, they spilled a little bit of coffee on their shirt. Like, it's just a little dirty. You just throw it in the wash, okay? The idea is all of these things that these people think are righteous, which they're not righteous deeds, by the way. That's not what Isaiah is saying. He's not saying by doing righteous things. He's saying in your attempt to do something good without God, to somehow make yourself look better, in your attempt, what you think you're doing is righteous. They are actually like a disgusting, filthy garment. A filthy rag in comparison to a morally perfect God. So to answer question 2, can we just be good without belief in God? No, we cannot. We can do moral things, but not good things. We can do things that might help our neighbors, physically speaking, but if there's a spiritual gain for it, if we're not doing something for the sake of the kingdom, if we're not doing something for God, it's not a good thing, it's a moral thing. Which leads to our final question: can we just be good enough without God? Now, another way we're kind of asking this is basically the question is, could a non-Christian go out and do so many moral things that God would be like, well, you know what? You didn't believe in Jesus, but you tried. Come on into heaven. Now, Pastor Fred last week taught about this whole grand scheme of things, like do all religions lead to God? This was partly included in that, and so if you want a whole thing on that, I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't listened already, to listen to last week's message. But for this week, let's still address this main question: can somebody do enough moral things to get to heaven? Ephesians 2 is a great place for us to park kind of for this. So we're going to start here. Ephesians 2, verse 1 and 3. And the idea is, when you did not believe, were dead in your offenses and sins. Among them, we too all previously lived in the lusts of our flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the rest. Here's what we need to understand. As when we do not believe in Jesus, when we are non-believers, are considered dead. Dead. And there is a metaphorical nature here in that, we're not physically dead. You might be walking around. You might be well, I'm alive. But spiritually, you are dead. You are completely and eternally separated from God. You are dead. And sometimes, if we read this, we can be tempted to be we think of dead maybe it's like a battery. It's not dead. It's not fully dead, right? They could do something. If they do enough moral things, they kind of recharge themselves and they would be accepted. No. When we are dead, there's nothing you can do to make yourself alive. This, not to state the obvious. If you are dead, you cannot make yourself alive. And so what Paul's saying here is, when you did not believe, you were dead in your sins, and because of that, dead people are going to end up where dead people are. That's hell. We can't do it on our own. We are dead, and that is where we are going. But then verses 4 through 5, Paul says this: but God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our wrongdoings, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. But Paul doesn't stop there. He continues, if we jump down to verses 8 through 9, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. I really don't know how Paul could be any clearer. You are dead, and you can be made alive, but it is not from yourselves. It is not a result of works. There is no amount of good moral things that you can do that would help you or make you alive. You are dead. And honestly, according to Isaiah, even our good things are like filthy rags compared to moral perfection. They're not even good things. There is only one way you can become alive. and it is through faith in Jesus. If anyone tries to tell you that there is any other way, they have lied to you. If you've told anybody else there's another way, then you have lied to them. There is only one way that you can become alive. You were dead, and you can become alive, and it is through faith in Jesus. Martin Luther says that the most damnable and pernicious heresy that has ever plagued the mind of man is that somehow he can make himself good enough to deserve to live forever with an all-holy God. Our salvation, being made alive, has nothing to do with what we can accomplish and everything to do with what Jesus already accomplished on the cross. That is the only way that we can be made alive. So can we just be good enough without God? Absolutely not. The only way to heaven is by belief in Jesus Christ. That's it. You know, the thing I remember the most about that trip to the Church of Scientology, it wasn't the stickers that we made. It wasn't the massive building. It wasn't even the wall that wasn't a wall that all of a sudden in front of our eyes opened up to be this giant screen. That was pretty cool. That is not what I remember the most. What I remember the most is that we walked in and we thought this would just be kind of a lighthearted thing, that we would learn about something, when in reality, all I remember feeling during that whole 3-hour tour was sad. Because I was watching this woman who believed wholeheartedly that what she was saying was going to bring her some type of life. That if she was just good enough, if she would just work out enough and eat healthy things and pay enough money, that eventually she would reach this stage where she was finally satisfied. That's what she thought. And she was trying to convince us with all she could that it was going to work because she had to believe it. And we're all there and we know that it's a lie. She is pursuing something wholeheartedly that is leading to death. And it was so sad. And we could tell her all we want. We could communicate that we're Christians and we believe in Jesus. And she wasn't receptive. She didn't hear it. But ultimately, I left there not laughing at it. I left there feeling really, really sad that I'd met somebody who I think was nice and kind and thoughtful, and yet was on her way to hell. That's sad. Can we just be good without God? No. I couldn't think of anything more creative to say it. I just thought I'd say it outright. No. We need Jesus, and Jesus, as the author of humanity, he decides what's right and what's wrong. We can do nothing good without him. In fact, he says in John 15:5, I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do a few good things. No, just kidding. It says nothing. You can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. The idea is that even though you can try to do good works, you can try to bear fruit, you're going to get nowhere. Because apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. And ultimately, what I want to say is this is actually really good news. Because if God does not exist, then there really is no right and no wrong. We can do whatever we want. That somebody hurting you is just imaginary. You can treat people however you want. They can treat you however they want. Human life doesn't matter. Justice is imaginary. It's anarchy. And what we're left with is exactly how Richard Dawkins describes, that we are left with no purpose, no evil, and no good, and nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. But that is not the world we live in. We live in a world where an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present God sets the standard for right and wrong. Where he designed us with this innate understanding of what is good and what is evil, and that as we pursue him, as we engage in his word and in prayer and in Christian community, and we in essence, we pursue obedience to him. What we need is God. We don't need to break free from Christianity. We don't need to break free from God. What we need to do is pursue him. Because it's only by pursuing God that anything will actually change. So ultimately, in this world, we will never actually find a perfect world, right? But until Jesus comes back. But what we can do is make it the absolute best we can. And it is not just by having a bunch of moral people. That is not the way. The way, if we want to really have a better world today, is we need to tell people about Jesus. We need people who pursue good. That's what we need. Because people, they can change actions, but only Jesus can truly change the heart. Whether we recognize it or not, we need Jesus. And rather than getting upset because the people around you, they're just not living the way you expect, or you have that person who you know who just doesn't agree with you politically, or they don't agree with your philosophies on different things, these people are all messed up, and they just need to change their actions. No. They need to know about Jesus. We can't complain about people who are doing what we deem as not good things and fail to tell them about Jesus. We haven't helped anything. What this world needs is Jesus. So can we just be good without God? No. But God made a way through Jesus. If we want to pursue good, we need Jesus. We need to tell people about Jesus as much as we can. We want to do things that push people towards closer relationship with him. It's all about him. And when you were dead in your offenses and sins, among them we too all previously lived in the lusts of our flesh, indulging the desire of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the rest. But let's close together by reading verses 4 through 5. And you have to read it out loud. But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our wrongdoings, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. Let me pray for us. God, thank you for your grace. God, thank you for that you have created and designed us with this innate sense of what is right and wrong. And yet, God, I ask that we don't rely on our own understanding of right and wrong, but that we read your word, that we engage in prayer, we talk with other Christians, and that, God, we pursue what is truly good. God, I'd ask for those people who don't know you yet, God, that we would have grace recognizing that they are missing something amazing, but that we also have the boldness to tell them about you. Thank you, God, that one day we will live in a world where evil does not exist. We cannot wait for that day. Thank you, God, for your love. Thank you, God, for your grace. In your name, amen. All right, everyone, have a great Sunday.